Hello and good afternoon to all listeners. First of all, we would like to thank the Radio Koradi team for their availability in giving us this opportunity to spread the Gnostic teachings online, as well as having opened this Italian channel, for which the Venerable Master will no doubt be very grateful. Having said this, let's introduce ourselves. I am Lorena Hermosilla, and my husband is Gonzalo Garcia. We are a couple of Gnostic teachers of Spanish origin. We have been living in Italy for almost 14 years now. For the first 3 years, we lived in Naples, where we opened the Gnostic school in that city. We then did the same for a year in Milan, and currently, for the last 11 years, we have been the directors of the Gnostic Academy V.M.Samael Aun Weor of Florence. Our school's aim is that of studying and personally experimenting Gnosis. It does not seek any financial benefit. It is open to anybody who would like to take advantage of the anthropological science of man, of civilizations, and of himself. His method is introspection, and his means are the consciousness and the being. We inspire ourselves to the anthropological studies that compare traditions of the past together with the more modern research in the fields of Gnostic anthropology. We also practice meditation and other disciplines that are relative to the inner work and promote the awakening of man, the activity of his consciousness, inner growth, alchemical, kabbalistical practices, etc. If you would like to take a look at our Florence blog, please visit www.nosifirence.blogspot.com. Here you will be able to find our contact information, the program of Gnosis, how to reach the school, and a lot of other useful information. And for those who wish to listen to old conferences on YouTube, you can simply type into YouTube Gnostic Academy Florence or Gnostic Academy Gonzalo Garcia, and you will find our channel. Okay, what is Gnosis? Gnosis is the synthesis of universal wisdom that has manifested through different time periods and places. When the key to self-knowledge is lost, or when confusion arises due to all the different contradicting theories, this is when Gnosis appears, each time under a different name. It is impossible to establish where and when Gnosis was born, because its fundamental principles are found at the origin of all spiritual traditions of both the East and the West. With the passing of time, unfortunately, these give rise to different interests, and the original mystical principles are lost. Although experts say that at the dawn of Christianism, there was a classical gnosis, meant as a syncretism of other traditions, such as the Egyptian, the Hebrew, the Eastern, and the Greek, which developed in the Middle East before and after the coming of the Christ. This gnosis first flourished in Alexandria in Egypt, and then it continued to expand into Christianity of the first centuries, until almost disappearing in the 4th century, once Christianism began the state religion. The word gnosis comes from the Greek, and it means knowledge, not intended in an intellectual way, but in the sense of a direct and intimate knowledge that comes from a revelation that generates from the contact between our consciousness and our being. I will finish by informing everyone that it is possible to ask questions. For those who are listening to this live conference and wish to ask questions on today's topic, if you look at the page on the radio that you are connected to, you can click on the icon either on the bottom right-hand corner or in the top left-hand corner on top of the image. There is always an envelope icon on which you can click and send questions to which we will gladly answer at the end of this conference. Okay, I will now hand the floor over to my husband, Gonzalo Garcia, who will talk about the important and practical subject of the daily practice of the Gnostic. I hope everyone enjoys the talk. Thank you. Hello and good afternoon on my behalf also. So I'm going to begin this third part of the talk with this reflection. Many are those who say that follow a spiritual practice in their lives. But from my own experience and from the knowledge of the Hermetic tradition of eternal Gnosis of all times, I feel that I have to say that any practice is not enough. Or better to say that any spiritual exercise should be founded on practicing that what we call the three factors of the consciousness. So there are three factors in which a practice can really produce an awakening of the consciousness or a true union with one's intimate being. This is so real that it incarnates within us, within matter, within the body, within the soul, on all planes of consciousness. These three factors or tools are called within contemporary Gnosis the psychological death, the sexual birth, and the sacrifice or conscious love for humanity. To sum up, the psychological death means to eliminate one's inner darkness or the psychological ego in order to liberate the internal light which is imprisoned, or one's own consciousness. The second factor, birth, means to incarnate that light by transmuting the vital sexual energy that allows one to create internal and spiritual body so that the being can incarnate within us. The third factor, sacrifice or conscious love for humanity, means to expand that light and disinterestedly donate that to all creatures that want it, but in a concrete way, not a philosophical way, which means in person and daily. And it is about this third factor that we're going to talk today, in part of the talk. We can see a confirmation of these three principles, for example, in the words of the great master recognized by all, Jesus of Nazareth. There is that passage in the Gospels where he says to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me." So to deny oneself is that which we've spoken about, love, the death of the I, the death of oneself, so that the light and the consciousness which is trapped can emerge. Take up his cross. Well, the cross is a symbol of many things, an archetype of many things, but it is clear that it is an alchemical symbol that cannot be denied, which is the union of the man and woman, of the lingam, yoni, of the phallus and uterus. This union creates a cross. Okay, and the third teaching of this sentence, "and follow me," well, this phrase invites us to follow as much as possible what Jesus has done in his own life, how he served others, how he helped others. So it is to imitate within one's own possibilities and vocation and capacity the same concept of service, of disinterested service and love for humanity. So this passage of the Gospel is just one of the many examples that we could find about the three factors which I've mentioned that a spiritual practice should contain, if we want the practice to be efficient, well addressed, and to give a good outcome, especially a true outcome. So within these three talks, today is the third and last part, I have grouped together the different Gnostic practices, those essential ones, those fundamental ones, which include the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, which I've just spoken about. So I'm going to mention these three practices which I believe that every true Gnostic should practice daily. Remembrance of the being and daily transmutation. This was the first exercise that was mentioned in the first talk. So for anyone who has missed that first or second talk, you can download this directly from the Radio Koradi website, or you can ask us and we can send it to you via email by writing at our Florence email address, which is nosifirenze, altogether nosifirenze@gmail.com. The other two practices explained during the second talk were meditation and death of the ego from moment to moment. And today, in this third and last talk, with this title, The Daily Practice of the Gnostic, I'm going to talk about the nighttime practices, which are astral projection and the vigil, as well as the sacrifice for humanity. So this is going to be the topic of today, which is very important. Of course, I have to summarize due to the time constraints that we have, and also because there are three exercises that would require more than one talk, more than one meeting together. Okay, so let's begin with this talk and with these topics. So first we're going to look at the astral projection as nighttime practices and the vigil. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the sacrifice or conscious love for humanity. First of all, I'm going to begin by answering those who asked me or who ask themselves, why so many practices? Why also at night time? Why should I also do spiritual practices? Okay, so I'm going to answer this. Well, we are a vehicle. The soul can serve either the being or the ego. Therefore, if we do not practice, we only become a tool of unconsciousness. We become an unconscious tool, a tool of fantasy. The consciousness either sleeps or is activated. Are you looking to have a real life or a false life? A conscious life or an illusory one? In fact, there are not that many practices, or it might be better to say that it's about the time that we live within our day, where we try not to be apart from our being, because outside of our being we understand that life tricks us and we get manipulated by our own subconsciousness. So we should try and live our daily life. We must live it anyway, but we can choose to either do it awake or do it asleep. So it's about adding internal, intimate practice within oneself in the silence of one's own day, in order to accompany our life. So it's about accepting or trying to create a constant connection with our own being, or accepting that we are an entity apart from our being, whatever we want to call this entity, but it is a separate entity from the being. So these practices are really about living one's own day and one's own life. But you can add sugar to it, or you can just live life in a flat way. That is, of course, a choice, without a doubt. So, apart from these practices that were mentioned in the first lesson and part of the second, so the remembrance of the being and death from instant to instant, there are obviously moments in one's own daily life where one must stop twice or 3 times to meditate, to do a vigil. So these are times of the day when one needs to withdraw. So why twice or 3 times a day? Well, we also need to eat twice or 3 times a day, and we don't complain about that because that is what the body needs. And so, that is also what the soul needs to live. So the last thing I wanted to say in answer to these questions that write to us, that have been writing to us after these talks, asking us why so many practices, it even seems exaggerated. Well, it's a choice of life. Do you want to live in contact with a superior part? Or do you want to live within your subconsciousness, an invented life? Or do you want to be awake in order to slowly liberate yourself? We find another teaching in another phrase of Jesus, where he says, "Never stop seeking, nor by day, nor by night, until you find the kingdom of light." Okay, so I'm glad to have clarified that in this third conference, which was necessary because, as I repeat, a lot of people have asked us why so many practices, but in the end, they're not. There are 2 or 3 practices where one withdraws within oneself. And the practice can even be enough, one practice, if it's done well. And done well means with intensity, by activating consciousness. And the rest, in reality, is simply living life. We do the work while we are walking, while we are eating, while we're talking to people. It's just about, in inverted commas, doing it while we remember the being through love, through transformation of impressions, transmutation, death from moment to moment. So it's about adding a vertical view to the horizontal life that we lead, the flat life that we lead. Okay, we can now go into the 3 topics that we're going to talk about today. The first nighttime practice we're going to discuss are astral travels. There are 2 questions that one can ask oneself. One is why? Why is it important to learn how to astral project, to project the state of consciousness outside of the physical body? And how does one do it? The reason why is very clear in V.M.Samael Aun Weor's work. He is the contemporary Gnostic teacher. And here he repeats many times, many reasons why it is important and necessary to at least learn how to astral project consciously. I can recap the main reasons that he talks about. The first point on which Master Samael insists is the need to be conscious outside of the body. So we're not talking about anything strange, but simply to be conscious outside of the body, just as we are conscious when we are in the body. The strange thing is not to be conscious when we are in or out of the physical body. We are often not conscious when we are lying on the sofa or on the bed, and this says a lot because by falling asleep unconsciously, we become a prey to anything and anyone. We become a prey to our own subconscious, to the I, or to psychological entities, unwanted psychological entities that are inside of us. And we can even become prey to entities outside of ourselves. So this is why Master Samael says it is important to try and practice maintaining that consciousness awake, or at least a degree of consciousness awake, so to avoid those attacks by the dark ones, to avoid being manipulated, to avoid being tricked. Imagine that one spends 6, 7, or 8 hours in bed asleep and be completely unconscious. Do you think that is normal? The fact that I know nothing of what is happening in my psychic plane, that I know nothing about what my soul is doing in other dimensional planes. And so I am left defenseless, unprepared, and completely at the mercy of the manipulation of my own I and the manipulation of others that have awakened, but awakened with an evil. With an evil because they seek out a specific interest, the interest to manipulate, to trick us, to maintain their own power. So that is why we need to practice conscious astral projection, so that we can defend ourselves and have autonomy to decide what it is that we want to do, to decide for ourselves, and for those decisions to be conscious. And not simply to have good intentions, or because of an education that we have received, or because we are following moral codes, or simply believing someone. We need to have the possibility of discernment, to be guided by our own beings and our own choices. And therefore, it is fundamental. And it is no less important, as Master Samael says, to practice astral projection consciously to allow us to have access to occult knowledge, to have access to hermetic science, direct knowledge, and not only depend on books and theories that we hear about in the hermetic traditions. I mean, these are necessary, but that's all they will ever remain. Traditions, beliefs of what others are saying, but we'll never be able to work or corroborate these for ourselves. So a school, presuming it is a school that is a complete school that teaches the 3 factors, will give you a lot of information and practices that will help you awaken. They cannot give you all of the information, not because it does not know it or because it denies you of something, but because you are the one who needs to access the rest for yourself. And also because it is important for a person to demonstrate discipline, love for the cause, for an internal path, and also a certain level of consciousness that will allow that person to use correctly and in a balanced way that which he has access to. And this is also to prevent people from falling into what we mentioned earlier, those who use knowledge to psychologically, economically manipulate people and manipulate others in many ways. I mean, there are guardians of the universe. Wisdom is protected. It's not just given to anyone with such ease. So, astral experiences are helpful and useful because they show commitment and comprehension of a conscious astral experience within the superior world, and this shows that one is on the correct path. And so at that point, with the will of the being, I am granted access through the will of the masters. If they want us to access a certain piece of information, then we can. And it is not because they want us to know more or to make our pride even bigger. but it is to continue to work well or to help others who still don't have that knowledge or haven't had access to that knowledge. So astral projection allows me to become a competent investigator of the internal and superior world, which means it allows me to study not from a book, because in the end, who only studies from books on this physical plane can damage his own brain, which means he can produce an abuse of the intellectual center or fall into confusion due to contradictory theories. And in the end, one ends up not believing in anything because they're all theories, there's no experimenting, so that's where they remain. They get forgotten about, or they cause just confusion. And it is very different when your study is direct, when you meet in the internal world your very own being, your divine mother, the parts of the being. It's a very different thing when you receive a teaching from mouth to ear, when you meet the masters of the White Brotherhood, and you are astonished by them, by the teachings that you receive from them. It is a very different experience when you yourself are allowed into the temples of the Superior Brotherhood. All of this is direct experience. At this point, it is not speculation or different opinions, who thinks one thing, who thinks another thing. And so this is how we can understand that astral projection is so important to eliminate any doubts that we may have. You receive trustworthy information because there are so many interests in those who say, I believe in the right, I believe in the left, I believe in above, the other one below. And so one then ends up with all these opinions, not knowing which one of these is the truth, or if any of these theories is, well enough, the truth. Well, there is only one objective way to know, and that is by activating one's own consciousness thanks to one's own being, and therefore be directly informed by him. And when we do the work, this allows us to also be connected with other beings, with other masters. So I think this encompasses the reason why the daily practice is so important, especially in this case, the nighttime practices that we're talking about, the astral world. It's called the astral world as a manner of speech, because the astral world is actually a door which allows to access all the other dimensional planes. So through the astral plane, which is known as the fifth dimension, you can then descend into the fourth dimension, Eden, the etheric and energetic plane, or heaven, or you can ascend into the sixth dimension, the dimension of the mind, of ideas, of Plato, of all the cosmic archetypes of knowledge and wisdom. Or you can yet again ascend into the world of the will, of the causes of natures, and so forth, through all the different hyperdimensional planes, where each one of these has a particularity. They're not abstract, but there is life there, there is civilization, people live there. And so here you can learn a lot. There's a lot of information you can find out because parts of ourselves exist here. So in order to get back that contact with that part of ourselves that we call the internal family, our eternal family, that would otherwise be forgotten about, and it is a horrible thing to forget about one's own father, one's own mother, children, grandparents. So this is also what allows us to live an internal path of death and awakening. It is that getting back of our eternal family. So one may now be able to understand why it is that the Venerable Master Samael says not only that astral travel is important, but he goes as far as saying that not to teach people how to astral project is a crime. It's a crime because it means not to give people those weapons that they need to defend themselves against people with ill intentions, masters of the other way, of the sinister way, of one's own eye, who all have as an objective to manipulate and insert strange ideas into people's hearts and minds. And that's why sometimes someone wakes up in the morning and begins to doubt, or it may result that the work that one has done during the day is lost at night because he is not present or able to defend that little treasure of his that he has earned during the day with his interior work. And so one may dream that his wallet is being stolen, his watch, his jewelry, or he may get lost in the streets of a big city, he may get lost on public transport. So these are all signs of how one is mugged and things are stolen from him in the internal world. So of course it is a crime. So why do some schools then not teach this? Well, I'm not saying that they are necessary pseudo-masters or pseudo-schools, in which case it wouldn't be taught how to consciously move around the superior worlds, because that way we cannot inform ourselves and we depend only on what they say, and they are the only ones who have knowledge. Of course, there is also a lot of this. Or it could simply be that they don't know how to do it. So if they are not practical with this, how could they possibly teach others? It would also mean that they're not real masters, they are not real initiatic schools. Okay, I think this is clear enough now, or at least I'm inviting people to reflect on the importance of this theme. Another factor is also all those silly little terrible stories that do nothing but disseminate fear on the eventual dangers that one may have with this type of experience. And as I have already mentioned, the only real danger is that to be unconscious in the day and unconscious at night. This is the biggest danger, to be without our being, which is our protective shield and our light that guides us. This is the biggest danger. And if there were to be any other danger, we would have already encountered it, because every single night we leave our physical body in our astral body, but we do it unconsciously, which is to say, with a sleepy consciousness rather than an awakened consciousness, and penetrate the superior or inferior worlds in order to know and consciously modify the events and control what we are doing. We still exit the body every night, but we only penetrate the inferior worlds without the weapon of the active consciousness that allows us to decide for ourselves or discern who is a real master, who could be a false master. So if there was any other danger, whether you were 20, 40 or 70 years old, you would have already encountered that. So everything that you hear about that is just people disseminating fear. As Master Samael said, or as Jesus said, those who don't do, and they don't even teach to do. So they close the doors for people. They don't do, nor do they allow to do. Okay, having explained this, I think the importance is very clear. So the next question is then, how do we astral travel? To summarize, it is not a mental practice, which many tend to do or have read or believe it is. It's actually quite the opposite. It's about physically getting up from your bed. It is a physical practice in order to produce a doubling, a projection of the subtle astral body. So quite the opposite of a mental practice. One must work with superior emotion, how to raise the superior emotion, to work with mysticism, divine love towards one's own being, or love towards the venerable masters of the White Brotherhood, my Divine Mother. So this conscious love is obtained thanks to the intensity with which I ask and the sincerity that we have with ourselves and the unity. As tools, we use mantras, powerful words. As tools, we can use prayer in silence, even mantras in silence. And we try to elevate ourselves through these mantras, this prayer, and especially elevate and increase the intensity of the heart, the necessity for comprehension. So we try to elevate our very own vibration. We try to activate the consciousness. Then we allow sleepiness to enter. Sleepiness is a natural substance which is necessary because the key to astral doubling is to maintain lucidity, to maintain that presence between the sleep and the awake state. So in that moment that I begin to hear and listen to that inner chatter and those discourses of our day that we have just finished, of what I need to do tomorrow, all of these are the different eyes that we have in the subconscious. And if we begin to pay this attention, this is exactly how we exit the physical body and we enter the astral world in this state through this internal chatter. So we are distracted. The mind is dispersed. We are hypnotized, and that's why this is the key. Sleepiness is the key, because this is the very magical substance that will allow our physical body to exit, to double. And if we haven't yet created the astral body, then we exit with the consciousness. So this process is not about controlling things, and it's even less so of a mental process. I must find the perfect balance in my attention, which I repeat is not a mental effort. It's an attention to love, to the vibration that we feel. After which, I surrender myself to the being, because it is light and it is love, and there is no one that can give us what the being gives us. And so, as I cannot wait, I just throw myself in to look for him. And in that moment, I can add whatever it is that inspires me, a specific mantra, a specific prayer. So it's about trying to activate this superior emotion, this vibration, without losing control due to all the disturbances that one's own eye can create at the same time. So observing how this state of sleepiness penetrates within me, and at that point what I need to do is to physically get up from my bed. And then at that point, after I get up, I fold back the sheets exactly as I would, as though I was getting up physically. And it could be that I have only gotten up physically, but what happens is that by trying over and over again, the moment will come that by doing that exact same movement, I then get up with my soul, while the physical body just lays there in bed resting. Just as this happens every night, but the difference is that this time I have done this consciously. And so what happens at this point is that I become an investigator, a researcher. I can get to know myself, get to know about my past existences, of my mistakes, of the causes of my own karma, of what it is that I need to correct in my life. I can then receive teachings from my own being, etc., etc. Okay, so this is basically a summary of the technique for astral projection. What can happen is that even when trying many times, like 5 times, 10 times, sometimes we only get up physically. That's not a problem, because that sacrifice will be repaid and one needs to be happy about it. What can also happen at this point is that the experience comes later. So after having tried several times, one goes back to bed, falls back to sleep, and then always trying to maintain this state of lucidity, presence, active consciousness, and while he is falling asleep, the being can offer an astral projection even a few minutes later, a few hours later, and this is without the need for us to do the exercise of physically getting up. So this can happen many times. And I can testify firsthand for this, that many times that I have projected, it has been not in the moment of me actually doing the exercise of seeking the projection by physically getting up from my bed. This can happen due to the fact that there is a magnetism that attracts us to the physical body. There is too much identification with the physical body. Or sometimes we're just not interested, and the being is not interested to give you that experience, to pull you outside of the body. But there are many reasons. It can simply be as well that there is no need for me to be aware that I'm outside of my body, but the consciousness is there. It is outside of the body. This may be because the being is giving you a specific teaching that will create a shock in your consciousness, or sometimes it may be because you are undergoing some internal trials and tests, and therefore it's not good for you to know that you are in a different dimension, to know what that place is or where you are, because the Venerable Masters are observing you and your actions. And in that way, when you do pass that test, there will be this internal joy that is very intimate, very particular. Many times, in fact, most of the time, this is necessary. This mystery is essential for the soul to receive teachings as a consciousness. And if you were to be completely lucid in that experience, it just would not be the same. Okay, so if there are any questions, we can answer them, as Lorena said, live, or you can even write to us via email, because this is a very long topic, and the Venerable Master gives us lots of practices without the necessity to do any strange things, to go to any shaman or take any strange substances. There are natural systems in place to experiment a natural state, which is that of the soul present and awake outside of the body. And we can do this simply by using a mantra. A mantra is something essential that we should begin with, as the Master says. We have the mantra Egipto, which is associated to Egypt, but it is always pronounced this way, and that's not because the native language of the Venerable Master Samael was Spanish, but because it is a mantra, and so it is a sound. And for example, the H in Egipto is connected to the liver chakra, which is directly related to the astral body. So Egipto, E-G-I-P-T-O, even that P and that T, they have an effect on astral doubling, so we do want to try and pronounce it correctly. Okay, the second practice that we're going to talk about today, and we will have to summarize, is the nighttime vigil. So I'm going to divide this in the same way that I spoke about the astral travel. So why one should do this type of practice and how it is done. As said, one might ask himself, why is there such a need to work at night if we have done a good inner work during the day? If during the day we have self-observed well, we have transmuted, we have meditated, we have died within ourselves, within our ego. Well, just as I've said about astral travel, there are many of the answers present there. So one must understand the importance to keep our consciousness active, and that is just as much during the day as during the night, for many of the reasons that I've already mentioned when I was talking about astral travel. But in the particular case of a nighttime vigil, we're talking about sleep being used in a different way. Sleep is a magical substance, and in the case of astral travel, we are obviously using this natural substance to separate the soul from the body in a conscious way. And by that doing so, you become a researcher, a conscious investigator to understand what is happening, why it is happening, especially in these moments of the pandemic. What is true, what isn't? What are the reasons behind it? Or just to discover things about your material or spiritual life. So sleep then is used for these purposes. But when we are talking about the nighttime vigil, sleep then is used to study your own internal world, your own psyche. The best way that I can explain this, and how I like to explain this, is that there is a formula, like a mathematical formula. The more sleepy we are, the more visions we will have. So if we understand that sleep is a substance that connects the physical worlds to the internal worlds, this allows me now using sleep in a different way, without sleeping. So I am not talking about astral travel anymore. We're leaving that aside. We're now talking about the case where I get up after having slept for a few hours, and with those hours left, I practice prayer, meditation, however we want to call it, and by doing so, we are transforming that sleep, because we haven't slept all of those hours as we would usually do. So in this case, I would sleep, for example, 4 or 5 hours, which means I would still have sleep accumulated within the physical body. And the physical body has already used the sleep to repair the cells. There are many physiologists that explain that on a cellular and an organic level, we don't need all those hours of sleep that we actually give to it. So sleep is necessary for the soul. It has to be used well. Well, even just as the example we were giving through this practice of the vigil. So one is still sleepy because he hasn't used, or better to say, wasted all of his sleep by sleeping. And that state of feeling sleepy but being physically awake allows one to penetrate, because that is the effect of a meditation or an observation. You can penetrate within yourself. And now the self-study becomes something real. It's no longer something mental, something such as an effort of the mind. Now the I, the ego, is no longer something unreal that we make up, but you see it right in front of you, because you are with one foot in this dimension, this third and physical dimension, and your other foot in the other dimensions. Or better to say, in other levels of your psyche. Now the inner work becomes somewhat easier. Okay, this may not always happen, but that is to say, I am not seeking a phenomenon, I am trying to do a specific work. So just as I have said, if it does happen, that's great. But if it doesn't, then we have to think that by doing this kind of work, it allows us, at the very least, in inverted commas, to allow us not to spend so many hours unconscious, defenseless, and everything that may come with that. So as we've mentioned, being manipulated, tricked by one's own I, false masters that work within the internal worlds, or one may even lose the work that he has done during the day. So this exercise is always useful, and this is very important. So thinking about this formula that I've mentioned, so the less sleep I waste by being unconsciously asleep, the more visions I have, which is what basically allows me to be within two dimensions at the same time. And the Venerable Master Samael speaks about this at length. He calls it dream yoga, which involves using the substance of sleep, under which both of these practices that I've spoken about today fall under. So those include dream experiences, experiences that are far superior to dream experiences, such as astral experiences, and then finally an internal practice, which the Venerable Master Samael would call working on oneself internally, which we do during the hours of the night. And to give this a name here, we have called it the nighttime vigil. One may worry and say, well, I could fall asleep. What if I sit down and I just fall asleep? Well, okay, here is where the difficulty, but also the usefulness of this practice lies. Because that's where that sleepiness gets transformed through the exercises, the practices that are done with such intensity. So it is almost like someone who likes to surf. So you are surfing the wave, which is sleep, and if you're not good at surfing or you don't know how to surf, then eventually that wave is going to overcome you, and then in the end, of course, you're going to be underwater, etc., etc. However, if you do know how to ride the wave, then that is a different story. That's why it is important during this practice to do the exercises, prayers, mantralizations, basically all of the work that is taught in any Gnostic school is useful to be able to transform that sleep into what now becomes active consciousness. A consciousness that, thanks to that sleepy state, which in part remains and is transformed slowly, becomes like a kaleidoscope, like a microscope towards our own psyche, or a telescope towards the superior worlds. So that is where the difficulty, but also the success of this practice lies, which is in transforming that sleepy state into active consciousness, with practices, but not only practices done with intensity. So it's not a simple one just sitting down and practice a kind of Zen meditation, because one would simply fall asleep. So exercises are necessary where there is intensity of the heart or even physical intensity in order not to fall asleep. That would also be a different kind of practice which wouldn't be wasted, but it would be more linked to the practice of astral projection, for example. Okay, so everything that I am commenting on allows us to become, during the night, researchers of the superior world and of our own psychological worlds. In that way, being able to do a work on ourselves and die within our eyes. And this type of work allows us not only in the day, but also at night, during those hours of sleep, to maintain our consciousness awake. So it's this continuity in the work that one slowly works towards, that allows us to maintain our consciousness awake, not only during the day, but also in those hours that we are asleep. And if the consciousness is not completely awake, it is, however, alert, which is not to be underestimated, because this alone means to receive warnings about potential dangers. And it is thanks to this work that we do that creates a connection with the being. And so when the being thinks it is necessary, it can send us a message, an alert. He can warn us of a potential danger. So it is important that you just get up and start practicing. And even if one practices anyway, The being may still want to give you a warning or a message about something that you may need in your physical, your material, or your spiritual life. And that can go beyond that very moment of when we're doing the astral practice. So, what I am trying to say is that by creating this connection with our being, the teaching and the revelation can arrive at any moment that the being believes us to need this. So what we are doing is maintaining that channel open. So we are looking to become a tool that is not a problem for the being, but it is useful. We are collaborating with our own being. Because as I said at the beginning of today's talk, is that we can simply be like animals. We can be a tool for the subconsciousness or the ego. Okay, having now explained what a vigil is, yes, I can go on to explaining how we can combine the vigil and the astral experience. Because one may say, well, if I only sleep 5 hours, when am I supposed to practice the astral projection? Okay, I think after having explained everything, it's not so difficult to imagine. So I can just get up earlier than what I usually do and practice a meditation or a vigil. So instead of getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I can get up at 6 or at 5. And that little sleep that is left, I can use it for the meditation or the work. This is fantastic. So I still have that moment where I go to bed. I can do a practice then. Or I can even do an astral practice after the vigil where I haven't used up all of the sleep. And after the vigil, I could sit down, not lying down flat, but simply sitting down in a horizontal position. Then your astral body immediately jumps out of the physical body. First of all, because I'm still tired, but secondly, because I have activated the consciousness thanks to the practice that I've just done. So there's not much more that I have to do because this happens quite naturally. Okay, as a last point for today's lesson, or the third exercise that I'm going to talk about, and it's not any less important because it is last. As a matter of fact, it is the most important. I'm now going to talk about the sacrifice. So why do I say that it is the most important? Well, that's because without disinterested sacrifice, no other practice can work. So no practice can give fruit without this. And that's because it is not us that is doing. Or it's better to say that we do not obtain results out of our own merit during the practices, but practices allow us to generate cosmic currency. The practices with sacrifice allow us to eliminate karma and to be repaid. And that is how or why we receive divine grace. So if one observes the passage from the Gospel, when does Jesus send his advocate? When does he send the grace of the Holy Spirit? Only after having performed his sacrifice. After he did his work, after he lived his passion, death and resurrection. And only then the Holy Spirit descends. So, to different degrees, this happens for everyone. So based on the level of sacrifice, I receive grace. It's not my result, it's not me who obtains this, it's not even the fruit of my own practice. But it opens the path for me, it gives me a possibility, especially because I make the effort to do the practice. I don't just practice because I want to obtain results. I practice with sacrifice because it is the lower part of myself that I want to sacrifice. I make an effort, I make a sacrifice because I could be doing other things. And this is what gets repaid. So there is grace at this point. I receive illumination, revelation, teachings. They help me with all of these practices that I have mentioned over these 3 days. So that's why I say I've left it to last, the sacrifice. But the sacrifice for humanity or self-sacrifice is no less. It is extremely important. It is the part that deserves the most time because it is through sacrifice that we wash our own karma. Because each one of us has committed many mistakes, and whether it's consciously or unconsciously, the consequences are often ignored, and this can only be negative karma. Okay, how do I wash or get rid of my karma? Well, first of all, I stop committing the same mistakes. So the practices allow me to discover my errors, to eliminate the consequences, to repent. So these practices are put at the service of others, because through making mistakes, I have harmed others. I don't know about a lot of this because I'm unconscious, I don't realize. So the only way to work this karma, we don't necessarily have to suffer, but we have to do the total opposite. So instead of hurting others, I can now serve them in a conscious way. And that is obviously to those who do want to be helped. Without sacrifice, the heart cannot grow. Without sacrifice, it means that there is an interest. Without sacrifice, I cannot activate consciousness. Without sacrifice, the problem is that the practices become stale. They become static, they are not renewed. And therefore, to talk about sacrifice, there are two things that I need to mention, one of which is self-sacrifice and the other is a sacrifice for humanity. So self-sacrifice means that I work with meditation, with the death of the ego, and all of the practices that we've seen in these 3 lessons. Eliminate and sacrifice egoism, for example, and transform this into compassion thanks to the Divine Mother. And by eliminating egoism, the consciousness frees itself, which is compassionate. Another form of sacrifice is to sacrifice one's own animal passions, so that what can come out of that gradually is divine love. Divine love within sexuality, or with one's own body when one is single, or within the couple when one practices alchemy. So this is the way of self-sacrifice, and that's of both the inferior and the superior. And this can also lead to the sacrifice for humanity, or the unconditional love for humanity. And that, of course, is done in accordance with one's own vocation, one's own conditions, possibilities, and what one feels. And what I also want to add about sacrifice, and that's also the reason why the name of these 3 conferences, the daily practice, is that also this exercise of compassion, sacrifice, unconditional love for humanity has to be applied every day. One may ask why, or what am I missing? Well, somebody can commit a good action, but it doesn't mean that it is conscious, and therefore it doesn't necessarily mean sacrifice, because one may help who doesn't want to be helped, or because he doesn't know how to help. So if someone doesn't die and self-sacrifice, they will not know how to sacrifice themselves for others. And so it has to be practiced every day, because we have a lot of karma and we have a lot to pay back. It has to be done every day, because every day one must learn how to love. It is the very essence of Gnosis. And life, it's not that I can love every now and again, or love who is convenient for me, or just love my family, or just love those who love me back. The essence of sacrifice is the knowledge that we are all one whole family. The family is the whole of humanity, not only those physical people who we call family members. We are all one body, the body of the Logos, and each one of us is a cell of that body. So sacrifice is not something moral or because of religion. It is something that we practice willingly and with awareness. It's about recognizing that we're all part of one whole. And you're not helping others. You are others and they are you. So you are helping yourself. You are helping us. You're helping the spirit, which is the only one thing that exists and that we all are. So one thing is to help someone physically, such as give someone food, clothes. It's good. But internal help, spiritual help, is far superior. So when we're talking about sacrifice, the superior part of sacrifice is to teach others how to free themselves. So it is to give the teachings which allows them to practice, to find a way out for their own consciousness, a way out of their own suffering, and a way to their own being. This is the most valuable thing that we can offer someone who is nothing but a part of us. So all of this should clarify then that somebody who wants to work on his own, to free himself, all those schools have not understood that they are falling into a spiritual egoism, and therefore they will not be helped by the Venerable Masters, because someone who thinks only about himself has forgotten about everyone else. So of course there are false schools, there are schools that abuse of this, and these do not fulfill the value of service to others, of collaboration and of sacrifice, because sacrifice costs me. I do it with great joy, but it does cost me commitment, energy. I have to put my heart into it. And even if it doesn't interest me, the fact alone of trying it out helps me double, because I discover how much I love or I don't love. I discover what it is preventing me from loving. And secondly, I receive back help, because what you give to others ultimately comes back to you. So the fact alone of giving means you're the first one to receive back, because it comes back like a boomerang. So the more you love, the more love you receive back. And that is how, in the end, you live in a permanent state of ecstasy, of love, which is the being. Okay, for the time we have, I think this is more than enough for today. It has been a pleasure of sharing this with all of you. And now, if there are any questions, I will give the floor back to Lorena. Very well, dear listeners, we're now going to leave you for a 15-minute break. We're going to put some music on in order to have time to look at any questions that you have sent. You're still in time to send some questions about today's conference by clicking on the icon of the envelope in the top left-hand corner of the page, on top of the poster, or in the bottom right-hand corner on the envelope icon. We're going to reconnect in 10 minutes when we will gladly answer any questions received. Thank you. We'll be with you shortly. Hello, good evening, everyone. So there actually aren't any questions, so we've just reconnected to say goodbye to everyone who is still connected. And once that we are here, I just wanted to end by saying, because we are Spanish, but a lot of people here in Italy have told us that the word sacrifice is not well seen or well understood. And so it is even more important that we keep reiterating this, that the sacrifice is to transform something inferior into something superior. It's a change in direction. If the coal doesn't sacrifice itself, then the engine will not run. It's cathartic. It is something that is necessary. The spirit is conquered by the brave, as Jesus said. The heavens are taken by force, by the courageous. So don't try to perceive a tranquil, relaxed spiritual life or something like yoga. The heavens need to be taken by force, so you need that tension, that pressure. And why? It's not that we are masochists. We're not talking about self-mutilation or anything strange like that. But what I mean by sacrifice is that our inner darkness puts pressure, a lot of pressure on us, and so to keep our consciousness asleep. So as Jung said, so if anyone still has any doubts, one of the greatest psychiatrists known, he says we live with 97% of our psyche asleep in the subconscious. And so the amount of pressure that this exerts on us to keep us asleep, we don't even realize. So to understand the amount of tension or force that there is that manipulates us both internally and externally just allows us to understand the degree of daily work and self-sacrifice and sacrifice for humanity that is needed to overcome this mechanical and anthropic force. So yes, it was important for me to clarify this, as I expected a question of something to do with this, but perhaps another time. So that's it. It's been a pleasure from myself and Lorena, and I would like to thank again Radio Koradi and all listeners for having spent this evening with us. And a big hug to all.